Lee, welcome back to the show. We're joined tonight by an important guest who's been fighting for the Second Amendment, fighting to clean up the NRA, Dennis Fusaro. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason. Good to see you.
Good to meet you tonight. And Lee, good to see you as always. So Dennis, can you fill us in on exactly what is going on with the NRA, the need to clean it up, and what it is? Or let me take a step back. How do you guys know each other, Lee?
Well, I think we know each other. You saw my comedy, right?
Right. I caught on to Lee Stranahan when I saw his Ron Paul Time Machine video back during 2007 in the run up to the 2008 Republican presidential primary, and I just thought everybody in the Ron Paul campaign loved that video. We wish we could find it again.
That's funny. This is one of the things that YouTube erased. And by the way, Dennis, tell me, Jason, what you did for Ron Paul.
Oh, I was a national field director for 6 months during that campaign. I went from sometime July of 2007 to January, February. I think the end of January of 2008. And then I did some additional contract work and then dropped off the campaign.
And so I've also worked with Dennis on a number of political things. In fact, he's not only a Second Amendment advocate, he's a First Amendment activist. And he was actually arrested.
I was prosecuted for free speech by the state of Maryland, the Maryland state prosecutor, and I won a jury trial, a unanimous verdict, not guilty on 2 counts. Me and my associate, Steve Waters.
So maybe we'll talk about that in the second Patreon part.
Yeah.
And speaking of Patreon, by the way, Dennis, tell them about the podcast and Patreon channel.
We're going to be doing a podcast to hit various issues, obviously, first and foremost, Second and First Amendment or First and Second Amendment, and then a whole host of other issues that I think are linked together, including father's rights. Go ahead.
I don't know if he looks at, but Dennis is actually older than me. Let me point out. And Dennis, how many grandkids do you have?
Last count I had 23.
Whoa.
Maybe more than 25. I can't keep up with them.
I know. Whoa.
Holy
right?
cow. Yeah, that's a lot.
I had 6 children. Some of my children are quite prolific.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
So anyway, Dennis is going to be covering a lot of issues on the podcast and the Patreon channel, and including, well, can we talk about where we're going Monday? Do you mind saying?
No, I don't mind.
Okay. Tell them where you're going on Monday, Dennis.
Oh, I'm going down to Paraguay to work on my 10-year residency visa. I already have a short-term 2-year residency, so I'm basically an expat.
That's very interesting. So,
here comes one of my sons, by the way.
So, tell us a little bit more about this wrongful prosecution. I think a lot of people are very concerned with lawfare these days. And certainly we've witnessed President Trump be victim of it. I've been a victim of it. What happened? What do we want to get into? I mean, you're fighting for the NRA. I don't mean to direct you away from that. What's the goal there? And
well, actually, I would say 2 things in my life since 2010 have played into my understanding and my ability to impact what is happening in the NRA currently. Because one, back in 2011, I was hired by an attorney, a law firm, to go and sit in on the deliberations of a committee of the Uniform Law Commission dealing with this subject of charitable assets, which when we start talking about the NRA, that's going to be a big part of what's going on in the NRA. Okay, charitable assets. And then the second part is First Amendment retaliation. You've heard of the Vulo case? Well, I know what First Amendment retaliation is because I've experienced it. I experienced it by the state of Maryland. Basically, the state of Maryland has a Office of State Prosecutor, which I believe is designed to control the political dialogue in Maryland. It's designed not just to, go after the conservatives or the right-wingers. It's also designed to keep their far left and progressive people on the reservation or keep them from speaking in ways that might cause the reservation to wake up. And so they created this office at the statewide level. For instance, in Maryland, if you were to commit a campaign finance violation or a campaign law violation, instead of if you're a Republican in Southern Maryland or Eastern Shore or far Western Maryland, so instead of your local prosecutor dealing with it and saying, okay, Fred, I know you made a boo-boo, you didn't put the right disclaimer on, slap on the hand, don't do it again, right? No, it goes up to this state level prosecutor in Towson. And think about it. It's a way to keep control of the whole conversation and keep everybody on pins and needles in Maryland. So, that's why guys like Hogan, they come in and play the respectable opposition.
Larry Hogan, not Hogan,
was
right?
the governor of Maryland,
Right?
And versus someone like Dan Cox, who really wants to make a change. He gets treated roughly. Michael Perutka gets treated roughly. Anyway, that's my analysis.
And so is this Charlton Howard? This is the state prosecutor. How is this different than like an attorney general or something like that?
Well, it's a strange office that they created by constitutional amendment in Maryland. It is not the attorney general. I had never heard of it when it came after me. And basically they came after me and my associate and a friend, Steve Waters, for a auto call or a robocall that didn't have what they said was the required government disclaimer. I don't know if you're familiar with the McIntyre versus Ohio or Talley versus California Supreme Court decisions, but the government is always trying to force us to identify ourselves, and who is the maker of this speech or that speech, as if this provides some kind of, really valuable information. And so they prosecuted us, not because truly not because of the lack of a proper disclaimer, but because they didn't like the content of the speech, but they knew they couldn't go after us for the speech. This is not the person on the screen, Charlton Howard. He's not the state prosecutor that prosecuted us. It was a man named Emmett Davitt.
So
Emmett what?
It was a gentleman named Davitt. He retired.
Jason, have you ever worked on a political commercial?
No.
Okay, so I've done a few. One thing about those, the disclaimer, the part at the end that says this is paid for by so-and-so, you have to be really careful, because if the font's not the right size and they don't like your candidate, they'll bust you. That's what he's talking about. They really will. So you have to be, normally font size, you do what looks good, right? You can't do that with disclaimers. It's got to take up so much of the screen. It's got to stay on for a certain number of seconds. It's crazy.
Well, more than that, Lee, is if we had followed the proper format of the disclaimer, I could have put in a name, and not that I did. The communication could have said, paid for and authorized by Joe Jones, not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. And then under Maryland law, for the type of communication it was, you had to put like your actual physical address. So we could have found an address somewhere, 123 Main Street, Dundalk, Maryland, whatever the zip code is, right? And supposedly that information somehow enables hearers of the message to make decisions they otherwise, or interpretations or understandings, or gain understandings of the communication, the validity of the communication, the value of the communication, that they wouldn't otherwise get if the disclaimer wasn't there. But that's just bunk. They would never know. They would never know that it was wrong. But because it didn't have the exact format that they demand, they use that as the means to punish the makers of the speech for the content of the speech that they couldn't directly attack. So they wanted to put me in jail. They didn't even want to offer. They never offered a deal. So
think how many times, Jason, you said political ads as paid for by like Citizens for a Safe something.
Safe
right?
government.
So some citizens, meaningless phrase, right? Meaningless.
Yeah, anything.
Citizens for good dogs, whatever.
So
you see, that gives you nothing. I mean,
well,
they don't have
it's
actually. It's a good example of Soros. When he's putting in prosecutors, every one was paid for by Citizens for Fair Justice or whatever.
Well, but that's another good example, Lee, is these Soros prosecutors, is because I think what Dennis is getting at is that they make these processes so convoluted that at any given moment, they can choose to prosecute anyone for any of this, because basically no one's going to be able to know and follow every single detail here, and it's just a matter of selective prosecution. I mean, look, this is what we've seen with Trump. This is what we've seen with me. It's, I've been through court for 8 years with the same person doing the same kind of vexatious litigation. If there was actually justice, they could see through these things and get right to the heart of the matter. So basically, you've been persecuted with these bizarre regulations and pseudo-legal processes, but now you're having an effect at the NRA, right, Dennis?
Well, that's correct, because the NRA was set upon, if you could put it that way. A lawsuit was filed by the New York Attorney General, headed by Letitia James, a vicious
Right.
anti-gun statist. Yes, she's a leftist, anti-gun person who said a lot of nasty things about the NRA. The problem in this case is that the leadership of the NRA, headed by Wayne LaPierre, had actually done things and had taken actions that constituted malfeasance. The civil law equivalent, it gave Letitia James the civil law equivalent of probable cause in a criminal case to initiate this action.
That raises a good point. Jason, just be honest. Okay. Did you think when you heard about the did you think it was just bullshit lawfare at first? Because I did. I thought just the government was going after the NRA. It's just bullshit lawfare.
Well, may I speak to that, lady? Let me say it my way, if I may.
Yeah.
Imagine that I'm a donor to the NRA, Dennis Fusarao, life member. I give the NRA an extra contribution of $100,000. I can't. Okay, let's say it's $1,000, and I want them to use it for the purposes and missions, excuse me, outlined or listed in the bylaws, right? Well, so instead of the money being used for that, the money is used in ways, for instance, private flights for somebody's niece to go get hair appointments on chartered aircraft in Nebraska, or hundreds of thousands of dollars of suits in Orange County, or other things, or no bid contracts in violation of NRA bylaws and policy.
Dennis, are those real examples?
Yeah, those are real examples. And so, in other words, the members are giving their hard-earned money, and the people at the top. Do you remember T. Boone Pickens back in the 80s, the corporate raider?
Yeah.
He'd find a company that was no longer being run for the benefits of the stockholders. It was now being run for the benefit of the management. So it's the old principal agent problem we have all the time, and it requires vigilance. And in this case, people working inside the NRA blew the whistle and said things are happening that are not right. And they disclosed those things in such a way. There was a bogus bankruptcy filing in Texas. And this is where the New York Attorney General got their evidence to justify going into court. And the jury found Wayne LaPierre civilly, in the civil sense, guilty and owing the NRA $4.35 million. And they found that the NRA had failed in its fiduciary obligations to its donors. And this is where we get the idea of charitable assets. These are things entrusted to the leadership of the NRA, and the NRA went to the state of New York. I would like to get out of the state of New York, but the NRA went to the state of New York and said, give us this special privilege, the right to collect money and not pay taxes on it, for example, and have the corporate veil to protect us from certain forms of liability, right? So in exchange for that privilege from the state of New York, the NRA agreed to operate in certain ways. Personally, I would have gotten out of New York back in the 80s, but they didn't do that. When they finally realized they needed to get out of the state of New York, it was too late. There was too much malfeasance that they couldn't cover up, because they have to go through, in order to leave New York, in order for New York State to say, okay, you have these charitable assets, you've used them properly, everything's in good order, you may now remove those charitable assets to a different jurisdiction, Texas, Tennessee, Florida. Okay, but the NRA couldn't pass that test. And so some things went on in the NRA that caused some real problems for the NRA in general. And it's a conflated situation where you have an anti-gun attorney general attacking the NRA for things that were legitimately done wrong. So,
Jason, let me ask you another question. Can you name two other anti-gun groups other than the NRA? Two other pro Second Amendment pro-gun groups?
No, I mean, obviously the NRA is the first one that you think about. But just to answer the first question, I was aware that there was financial something or other going on at the NRA only because of, the work that I do with Charles Ortel. Charles had zeroed in on that guy, David Keene, because he was involved at some point with the NRA, but also the American Conservative Union. Do you know about that guy, Dennis?
Oh boy, do I know about David Keene.
So,
okay.
Let me.
He's actually on our executive council. He's a former president of the NRA.
So my point, Jason, is for people who don't know a lot about gun stuff, I'll say, or gun organizations. There's actually a couple of other groups, and they were alternatives to the NRA. They've been around for a while, and you were actually on the board, worked with one of them, right?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
National Association. Who are the other two groups, the big groups about guns?
Well, there's several other groups. There's Gun Owners of America. There's Second Amendment Foundation, Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, and then there's National Association for Gun Rights, and then some groups headed up by the Dorr brothers, DORR brothers.
And so, people hear the NRA a lot, right? I mean, that's a lot of people. In my mind, that was the gun group. But
It's the Cadillac of gun groups.
What's it?
It's the Cadillac of gun groups.
Right. Well, apparently not. So, Dennis, why were people involved with those other groups? Have they been suspicious of the NRA for a while, or think what was the criticism these other groups had of the NRA?
Well, the NRA has oftentimes been come under criticism for compromising in ways on public policy or in election races that other groups and individuals, grassroots activists, think they shouldn't be compromised. And
so basically, if you're a liberal, right,
well,
they hate the NRA, right? If you listen to liberals and the media, you think the NRA are the most hardcore gun rights people, right?
Yeah.
That's not true. It's not been true for a while. Until I met Dennis, I didn't get that. I think a lot of people watching may get that because they may be stalwart Second Amendment advocates.
So let me try to explain. So a lot of these other gun groups are legitimate, and they should be. I encourage people to join them. I'm a life member of Gun Owners of America. These groups play an important and vital role. They bring at times different perspectives and different approaches to the gun issue, but you're always going to need the NRA because the NRA is two parts. It's that cultural funnel that brings people into the culture, the gun owning culture. It's the shooting sports, the education and training, the hunting. Okay. That's where you get if you don't have a gun owning culture, you're not going to have any political power. So part of the problem with the recent unpleasantness, if you will, at the NRA over the last 6 years, since about 2018, is you had the diversion of charitable assets, on somewhere on the order of $200 million spent on this litigation, going to this particular law firm headed up by William Brewer, who has been a contributor to Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and Beto O'Rourke. And you ask yourself, okay, I understand lawyers can be competent, even though they may not agree with you ideologically. But in this case, this law firm lost a lot of cases as well. So we didn't get any real value for the money spent. And so all that money diverted to this legal battle, let me finish, is it didn't get spent on education and training, maintaining that cultural funnel. And it also it got diverted from the political fight, the public policy fight at NRA ILA. In the meantime, during this period, two things happened. People became aware that, yes, there was malfeasance, there was corruption, that Wayne LaPierre had decided, for better or for worse, that he was so integral to the gun rights movement, to the right to keep bear arms movement in the United States, that he deserved more, that he deserved better, that he should be rewarded more out of these charitable assets entrusted to him and the NRA by these grassroots, working class, hardworking donors. Okay. And so that the political fight was weakened, the cultural funnel was weakened, and these other groups had to step in many ways to fill the void.
So, Dennis, can I ask you to put a number on it? How much money are we talking about? Be specific.
Well, I said $200 million.
So
that's money and there's what has happened recently, Jason, just to be clear, I, along with 3 others, got elected in a surprise election last year. I was a petition candidate. I was not nominated by for want of a better word, no, I'll just say it, the Insider Nominations Committee. And I came in 16 out of 25, and my other 3 running mates, they came in the top 5. Okay. And that was like a sea change, because suddenly what I would call the election lock, that the insider election lock, had been broken. And what happened next was that at our first board meeting in May, we elected a new executive vice president. Wayne LaPierre had resigned. He'd been found guilty by the jury. We have a new executive vice president, Doug Hamlin, a great guy, Marine, and he's working hard to correct all the deficits, all the deficiencies at an administrative level. And I support Doug fully. And now that Doug's in charge, and we got rid of the Brewer law firm, by the way, we got rid of it at the last board meeting. He says he resigned. He was going to get fired, so that's why he resigned. And now we can say, now we're back to business as usual. Now we're back to rebuilding the programs. And now we can have that discussion about how we do gun rights or right to keep bear arms public policy with the other groups.
So I think you see why I want Dennis to have a voice. Because Dennis is dealing with very important issues that affect a lot of people, regular people, and voters who are Republican. And then money has been wasted. And Dennis is fighting. He's a pro-second rights, Second Amendment person, fighting for the right thing. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Just to share where I'm coming from. I mean, I was I was Gun Owners America director of state legislation for some 7 years, from the 90s into early 2001. And prior to that, I did field work for them in Virginia as Virginia legislative representative and other things like that. So I had about a 10 to 12 year track record with Gun Owners America. I'm one of those people that used to throw stones at the NRA, and I'm still going to advocate on the inside for a better approach from ILA. That doesn't mean that who's running it now is bad. I'm just saying it's not a question of good versus bad. It's a question of good versus better.
So you see what, Jason, how much have you heard about this in the right-wing media?
Well,
have you ever heard anything about this?
Not very much. I mean, again, I've spoken with Charles about it, and all the things that Dennis is bringing up are just exactly the kind of things that, come to, red flags. This thing's got a huge amount of money coming into it as a 501c4, $196 million. 501c4s are sort of inherently suspicious because there's a lot of things about it where they don't have to tell you who's giving the money and whatnot. And what Dennis was just saying, I mean, even without knowing any of the details of the law firm, just from looking at this, it was obvious that there are certain people on here who are getting paid really large sums. And I just wonder if the work that they're doing is, here's somebody getting $1.1 million. It's Wayne LaPierre. It's a lot of money for the person who is the CEO or whatever. He's the executive vice president here. I mean, why is he paid more than anybody else? And
Can I give you an example? May I give you an example?
Yeah.
I think at one point, the Red Cross in the DC area, because they say the DC area is very expensive to live in, but I think the CEO of, or whatever the equivalent position of the Red Cross was making $800,000 a year. And when you totaled up all the benefits that Wayne LaPierre was making, running a $400 million a year operation, he was getting like almost twice that amount. So even if it's 1.1 million, it does raise some questions.
Yeah, I mean, this goes to so many different points, even for people who might feel like, well, I'm not a gun owner or I don't care about the Second Amendment. I'm not saying that's the way anybody should feel. But even if you do feel that way, this issue that Dennis is onto is bigger than just the NRA. It's the abuse of these nonprofit tax-exempt entities. I mean, you can see right here, this is obviously a huge issue, that there's a $27 million legal bill. I'd be interested in learning more about this $10 million worth of printing and mailing. That sounds quite questionable. Membership consulting. This is all ways that people are sucking money out of this organization in a very opaque sort of way. And then here we see, all this stuff that they don't have to report on. So, all of these.
So let me just say this. There's two wings of criticism of the NRA. There's the anti-gun criticism, which basically, the blind pig finds the nut. They shoot at the NRA. They throw stones at the NRA. They use certain facts that are accurate to paint a picture that is inaccurate. But on the other hand, the grassroots gun rights movements, when you go to places like ammoland.com, the website, the blog site, NRA in Danger, we are cleaning up our own house. In this particular instance, rightly or wrongly, we got help from the outside. And, not that I wanted to have Letitia James involved. I got deposed by the New York AG, and I told them, I said, be careful what you wish for. You get rid of the old guard, you get guys like me. I'm a fanatic in the right sense. I said, did you see the movie Dune 2?
So one thing, let's contrast the NRA with Planned Parenthood. Okay, what's Planned Parenthood's main thing that they do for Democrats? And don't say abortion, because that's not it.
Birth control. Give people the pill.
No, it's not even that. Fundraising.
Oh.
When you look at how much money from Planned Parenthood, people give it, and people understand that. If you give money to Planned Parenthood, you're giving money to Democrats, basically. And people get that. So people thought NRA was like that. But one thing about this money that's been wasted, it's money that could have been going to get good candidates elected. That's my point. You see?
So,
am I right about that, Jim?
You're right. So let me try to wrap it up for you, Jason, just to sum it up. I got elected in the election that occurred prior to May of 2024. I got elected with Rocky Marshall, Phil Journey, who's a family law judge and a former state senator from Kansas, and Jeff Knox, the son of former NRA First Vice President Neil Knox, who fought this battle in the 90s against Wayne and lost back then when they were overwhelmed because of the use of Charlton Heston. Be that as it may, my main goal since I got elected, and I characterize myself as sort of like the dog that caught the bus, and I've been drinking from a fire hose ever since trying to figure out what's going on here because I did not expect to get elected. Once I got on the board, my number one focus was getting rid of the Brewer law firm, which was sucking the lifeblood financially out of the NRA. Now that we've accomplished that, we can move on to other business. There's some cleanup that needs to be done. There's the question of indemnification, that the monies that were paid to Wayne LaPierre for his legal defense, somewhat on the order of $8.3 to $8.5 million, which was improperly given to Wayne LaPierre in violation of New York state law. That's my opinion.
Wait a minute. You're saying $8 million spent on the legal defense of Wayne LaPierre separate from anything to do with the NRA?
Right.
What was that about?
No. If you go to New York State Nonprofit Corporation Law, section 721 through 726, and you read what has to be done in order to indemnify an officer or a board member or an employee of the NRA or a nonprofit when there's a lawsuit and they are named in the lawsuit personally, that procedure was not properly followed. Monies were given to Wayne LaPierre up until he was found guilty in the civil sense by the jury in that civil action back in February of 2024. He resigned.
8 million?
8.3 million roughly.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. See, so
there may be other things. So, that's
gentlemen,
him going to New York, his attorney.
Are we planning to continue our conversation here on the sponsor exclusive segment on Patreon, or what do you want to do, Lee?
Yeah. Well, I'll go to Patreon. Let me say one thing before we go over there. Mm-hmm. I think is to see why I thought this is a great story to do on Patreon and on a podcast. It's very complex. And you've seen my work in Ukraine. What I want Dennis to be able to do is to lay out the pieces. A lot of names people don't know, right? A lot of these names people don't know. Well, you'll know them if you subscribe to the podcast and the Patreon. We're going to lay this out step by step by step. You see what I'm saying, Jason, about the approach?
Yeah. Well, and also everything you're talking about with the millions of dollars being spent on lawsuits and the struggle to get rid of the Brewer law firm. This is the essence of lawfare. It's not just bringing these problematic lawsuits. It's entrapping you with law firms that they control, that they can sabotage the case. We're going to talk about it when we come back. Stay with us, everybody.
I'll put it like this, Jason. Do you think Planned Parenthood would give a dime to like Tom Fitton or someone like that? Do you think they'd put him on payroll? That's how outrageous this is.
Yeah,
this
it is.
Money from regular Americans. Again, I'm not a gun guy because bad eyesight. I'd kill people accidentally. but when I heard about this story, I said, this story really needs to be told. And the reason I mentioned the money that they took is that's why Republicans losing sometimes, because the money was taken. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm not saying that there was a goal to hurt Republicans, but they enriched themselves at donor expenses.
Yeah,
Thanks,
well, we'll continue talking about all the details. There's a lot here. We'll be back in just a few minutes. People can join us on patreon.com/Stranahan and on odyssey.com. Actually, you know, Odyssey is changing their payment processor, so people probably shouldn't join. It's changing February 3rd, but you can still join for free, and there's a huge library there. The videos aren't going anywhere. And also people can go to crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com or subscribestar.com or